Everyone, good evening. Welcome to our Make Design Matter talk. So I'm Chelsea. I'm an architectural assistant from Article 25. Before we start our program tonight, I'd like to share a few informations of the talk and who we are. So Make Design Matter is mainly inspirational talk for the humanitarians organized by Article 25 with the support of BRE Trust. So our idea is to get together all of these great designs by the professionals and to create a platform where we can all share the international development through sustainable design. So Article 25 is an architectural charity with projects all over the world. We are driven by Article 25, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as you all know. So we deliver the design to improve healthcare, educational, disaster resilience, where for most of the areas where the good design is needed and not available at the moment. Since we focus in capacity on the ground, we collaborate with local architects, local consultants, and involvement of local authorities and communities in our designs. So tonight we're gonna have a special guest, but before we invite our guest, I'd like to thank to AHMM Architects for hosting this special event. So please welcome our speaker tonight, Josh and Harrison from CAUKIN Studio. Thank you.
So I'm Josh and this is Harry, and we're part of CAUKIN Studio, who are a group of architectural graduates who have been designing and building community facilities worldwide for the last 5 years. So we all graduated last year in June with our Masters in Architecture from Oil School of Architecture. And it all started way back in 2015 during our second year of architecture in the summer, when we were a bunch of friends that kind of wanted to travel and meet new people, experience new cultures, go to new places. But a lot of our peers at university were doing work experience and stints in offices, and we thought maybe there's a way that we can take the things we've learned at architecture school and our education and kind of implement it in a real world situation. So we set about by emailing tons of NGOs and charities, just saying, I mean, kind of a stab in the dark really, just saying, look, we're a group of enthusiastic architecture students, and we want to see if there's anything we can design and build for you that would help your NGO or your charity, or if there's a need for something, can we build it? And we were really lucky actually that a charity called Friends of Koh Rong, who are based on the island of Koh Rong off the coast of Cambodia, got back to us and said, yeah, we'd love it if you could build us a playground or sort of outdoor learning space. And at the time they just set up a school on the island, which obviously was to provide the kids, the local kids, an education, but also to sort of give them a place to get away from the negative impacts that tourism was starting to have on the island, which is why they wanted us to build this space. So we set about working with the NGO, the local people, the kids of the school, and trying to fund this project, and this was the output. This is Playscape. So this was funded by a Kickstarter campaign which we ran for I think about 2 months, which raised £7,800, and it was built in a period of 2 months with about 12 of us. And actually that fish in the middle there was featured in a music video by the music artist Caribou. I think the video was I Can't Do Without You is a single. And he basically put on his social media that a competition that if you can give him a good enough reason as to why you should have this fish, then he'll send it to you. So we said, we're building this playground for a school in Cambodia. Can we have it as the kind of the focal point? And he liked the idea so much that he sent it all the way across the world in a shipping container, and it stands proud at the centre of the playground, which is a nice touch, and the kids absolutely loved. But as a group of architecture students, what we've realised and learnt most from this whole experience and working and building with the local people was how applicable the skills we learnt from on-site, one-to-one construction was to our education. And it really made us think more about how, when we're drawing a line on paper back at school, how actually, when it becomes a detailed drawing and a builder or a contractor picks it up on site, how the hell it actually gets built. And I think often maybe that's a problem when detailed drawings get sent through and a contractor calls the architect and says, do you have any idea how I'm going to build this? So I think it was quite a valuable skill for us to pick up through doing this project, and was something that we then wanted to offer to other people. So since 2015, we've gone on to build over 10 projects worldwide in various countries. So this was the Ngo Kindergarten in Fiji, which we completed 2 years ago. And to our amazement and joy, it was nominated for the Architects Journal Small Projects Award. And then this one was completed last year, Savandrondra Community Hall, again in Fiji. So we've kind of been trying to scale up our buildings in terms of the impact they have on local people, the design quality, the construction finish, and educating more students and young professionals. And I guess trying to come up with a way of making our business model, if you like, sustainable.
So part of the way in which we wanted to grow our organisation and make sure that we could keep doing these projects was to offer it to other students, architecture students and young professionals to come away with us. So these people, these international participants then come away with us between 4 and 8 weeks and put forward their sort of architectural education, their design ideas, but they also then learn from the locals in terms of construction, the local context, designing for these kind of places. And the locals have years of experience building their own homes and community projects. So it's a real great exchange between the two people. And a big part of that as well is the cultural immersion. So working with the families. And from our feedback, that's been one of the most valuable takeaways with everybody involved in the projects. So growing on this, we managed to then sort of identify 5 key stakeholders that enable one of our projects to go ahead. So the first of which is us as a facilitator. So our role becomes sort of the governance of the project, the design and construction, and sort of the oversight of those different things, and the recruiting of the international participants. You've then got the local Ngo Collaborator. So with every project we do, we'll partner with a local charity who's built up a number of years of experience with those communities. So they've already built up that trust, and then they have the knowledge of the local place, and their role is to identify the needs of the local community and also fundraise for that building. You've then got the local community, who are obviously is of big importance that they are sort of encompassed into the whole process. So right from the very start, in terms of the brief making, the design ideas, design development, all the way through to construction, on-site designing, right over to handover. They're sort of real key players, and we have a lot of people, take time off work to come and get involved as much as possible, and it becomes a real collaborative effort to sort of empower these people and take on some of the design ideas and exchange and hopefully implement some of these additional into the new buildings. You then got the corporate sponsors, so people that are either putting in time pro bono, so we've got engineer support, or it's people putting in financial or fundraising towards the build cost and the materials. And then the final stakeholder is the design and build participants, so people that are coming internationally to both put forward their own experience, but also gain a lot of experience in return, and hopefully then build up this network of like-minded people who all have sort of a similar aim and similar goals in terms of social development. So having now built up this sort of framework and these 5 stakeholders, we then sort of all work towards a common goal, and there are a number of limitations that come up with pretty much every project that we do. So the first of which is budget, and with all of our projects being fundraised and working with charities, budget is always very, very tight, and once that has been used, then there is no sort of additional pot, there is no additional money. So we have to make sure that what we're doing and what we're designing and building will always definitely fit within that budget framework, and we don't ever leave a building unfinished or incomplete. We've then got time, so all of our projects to date have been built in a very short period of time, so between 3 and 8 weeks, and that's right from the initial groundworks right through to all the cladding finishes and handover. So that just means that we have to design in a way which enables multiple tasks to be undertaken at once. So often we'll have a team working on groundworks, foundations, concrete, and then another team working on prefabricated elements, timber portal frames or trusses, and then about halfway through the project, both of these then come together to create the outcome and the building. We've then got the sort of skill level of a lot of the people that are coming away with us, both in terms of the international participants, but also some of the local labourers. And one of the ways in which we sort of tackle this is that collaborative nature. So with every project, we'll partner with a local contractor who has years of experience working with the local materials, and also they can then sort of teach a lot of the international participants that are coming away with us and share some of those skills. So quite quickly, over a few weeks, you see people's progress quite rapidly, and sort of that collaborative nature really sort of works out.
On that point, it's probably worth pointing out that just after this photo was taken, Richard snapped that drill bit, so you can't see it here. But.
You then got materials and what's available. So a lot of our projects are, well, almost all of our projects are in areas which are fairly remote, and so it would be completely unrealistic and also inappropriate to get any sort of imported or difficult to obtain materials. So we want to build projects which are replicatable after we leave. There's no point in us building something which is one-off or needs something specialist or a specific skill set. And so all of our projects use local materials, but in an innovative or different way, which can either add value in terms of structural strength or environmental or climate conditions within the building. And so that's something we're looking at in quite a bit of detail. And then you've got the information which we have in advance of the projects. So with all of our projects being located all over the world, it's not viable for us to have site visits so often, and in a lot of the rural locations, even getting a good site survey can be very difficult. So what we have then to work with is Skypes with the locals, with the NGO, anecdotes, Google Earth images, photos, and it's sort of all pieces of the puzzle which then enable us to build up a kind of an initial design. And then when we arrive, a lot of that design will inevitably change, and we have to be very open to flexibility and adaptability in making sure that if there are any sort of issues that arise on arrival, that we're in a position where we're able to take those on.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe how many times we've turned up on site, and the photos that we've had of the site originally that were taken by the NGO or the local people have failed to point out the fact that there's like a 3-meter drop right next to the site or even on the site. So designing flexibility is a big important one. So this is a project which we hope demonstrates that we've kind of used those limitations and overcome them. So this was the 90 community hall that we finished last year in September after 2 months of construction in Fiji. And it was built, actually it was the third and fourth project that we built in Fiji with the same NGO. So we worked with the Nganga Giving Foundation the previous year on the Nweni kindergarten that I mentioned earlier, and which was a really good chance for us to go back and evaluate that building and then use the pointers we got from evaluating that building to hopefully improve this one. So actually when we were there the first time, we went around a load of villages in the local area and to identify need with the NGO, and the 90 community was one of the ones that came up with needing a community hall. And actually they've been without one for 7 years after their old one fell into disrepair and was deemed unsafe for use. And to a community in Fiji, this is really detrimental, because the community hall is absolutely the focus of all village life. A sort of typical village setup in Fiji would be that, let's say, each family provides one thing for the village. So let's say one family does all the fishing for the village, one family farms all the cassava, or whatever it might be. And that all comes together right at the hub of the community, which is the community hall. So it was a shame that they hadn't got one and they really wanted one. But An interesting addition to the brief of this one was that the Ngani community is really famous for their performances of both the meke, which is a traditional dance, and their choir singing. So people come not only from all over Fiji, but all over the world to this community to see their performances. So it was quite important that the building we designed had an element of that within it. So the whole process starts in the UK, working with both the NGO, the local people, and international participants, and we kind of host design charrettes or design workshops. These were in Cardiff, with some of the participants that are coming away with us, and it's kind of a constant back and forth between the community, the participants, the NGO, and evaluating ourselves to formulate the brief and then come up with a concept design, to develop that design, and actually sketches like these are far more valuable in terms of communicating our ideas to both the participants and the local people than maybe your more conventional architectural drawings are. So it's trying to find a way to make sure that even though we're here in London and they're in Fiji, that we're still keeping everyone involved and in the loop of the project as much as possible. And that's mostly done by constant feeding back of emails and sketches and photos like this, and Skype calls with the NGO and the local community to make sure that we are designing and developing the building that they really need and want. So Harry touched on trying to add value to the buildings we're building, so using completely local materials, affordable local materials with local skill levels as well, to make sure that we can kind of add something and create an interesting building. So Fiji, the climate there is very tropical. They get a lot of cyclones, so this one was really important that we worked closely with our structural engineers who are centre space design to come up with a structural strategy that would be able to withstand, to a certain extent, future cyclones. So using things like big strong pine poles as an exoskeleton to the building, tied down with big foundation piles, and making sure that every connection was bolted, every kind of loose bit was cyclone strapped down, and doing all that we could within the budget and within the local materials that we had to make sure that this building is going to last and is still going to be interesting. So yeah, these are some of the kind of very early stage, well, not that early stage, I suppose, visuals that we developed and sent back to the community, and the photo on the right received a lot of love from them. They like that one because it's got photos of local people in it. So going through all of that, we get the structural sign-off from the engineers. We kind of do the local planning permission drawings that we need, and then we arrive on site with usually between 15 and 25 participants from all over the world. And in Fiji, arriving on site means that when you get into the village, there's this traditional ceremony where you present a sevu, which is sort of a traditional gift. And what you can see here is the roots of a kava plant, which they grind up into a powder and mix with water. And it's like a very ceremonial drink. And it's supposed to relax you, but it tastes like muddy dishwater, as you can see. It looks like that. It's then working to identify local key community members who play key roles within the project. So Harry mentioned the local contractor, kind of skilled labourers in the village, and then so Monet here was pointed out to us by the locals as the village strongman, and he was literally like a scaled up version of a normal person. He's huge in every way, but he was the guy that helped us lift all the pine poles and was there every day on site relentlessly, working really hard. So he was absolutely a key player. Sia, she was known as the mother of the village. She has, I think, 15 kids, or was it 14? She has a lot of children, but she was still there every day on site. She cooked cakes, bought everyone tea, was a big morale booster throughout the whole project. So these key players have really helped us to kind of intertwine with the local community in the best way. And then, as we said, identifying local contractors. So Sakuza here has been a contractor in Fiji for over 30 years, and he's built a ton of buildings of all different shapes and sizes, and actually has worked on some really interesting buildings there with Ngo Giving Foundation, who are the NGO we were working with. So he was instrumental in kind of making sure that the local team and the international participants were always working well together. And obviously his knowledge of construction, especially in this context, is just absolutely endless. So, and And as I said, getting involved with the community activities and local ceremonies. So this is us dancing the meke, which I said 90 were famous for. We probably didn't do them much justice, but this was on the opening ceremony day. So we spent, I think, the last 4 weeks of the project learning the dance, and this was the outcome. So here's the site from above. So there's 2 churches in this village with the main site. So as you can see, the community hall was really at the centre of the community. And I said about getting photos of the site and them not showing all of the details of the site. We found that it was actually a 3-metre drop from the top to the bottom, which we hadn't accounted for. So it's making sure that we design that flexibility in, that when we get there, it's not the end of the project. We can adapt to it and design around the surprises, let's say, that we get when we arrive on site. This one's quite a good photo. In fact, Moni's not even in it. But this was probably 2 weeks into the project when the 38 pine poles, which each weighed half a ton and were sort of 200 millimetres in diameter, arrived on a flatbed truck on site. And we thought, how the hell are we going to get them off this truck? So we started with the first couple by sort of jamming in some 4x2s and pivoting them off so they fell off the side of the truck. And it took ages and it was a bit unsafe. And we thought, there's no way we can do this. So one of the guys on the rugby team said, well, why don't we just tie a rope around the end and pull them all off? And within 10 minutes, they pulled all 37 pine poles off the truck. So, and as you can see, they were loving doing it as well. So it's sort of coming up with inventive ways to get around difficulties or headaches that maybe if you were building here, you could just hire a crane and that would be done. But we don't have that luxury there. So this was, again, another traditional thing in Fiji is when you put the first pine pole into the ground, there's a religious ceremony. Everyone kind of, all the village elders pour in a bit of concrete and everyone gets involved. And it's, again, a really nice pivotal moment in the community, in the project, where everyone kind of comes together and celebrates the building to become. As I say, lifting these huge pine poles. I mean, I think at this stage in the project, this is probably 4 or 5 weeks in, and we lifted these pine poles and they were 10 meters long. And we thought, wow, this is way bigger. I mean, maybe it happens all the time that you design a building and then you get on site and you start building it and it's way bigger than you ever thought it ever would be. But as we started to sort of fill in the gaps, it kind of shrunk in scale. So this is us fixing the first roof sheet. Again, another ceremonial point in the build where the first roof sheet goes on, and it's kind of another blessing to rid evil spirits. Installing the stud wall. So Harry mentioned the kind of trying to prefabricate things and get as many processes going on site at one time. So we actually prefabricated all the stud walls away from site whilst we were putting all the main structure in, so that they were then just all lifted in as one. And then working, I guess, in the last week or so on all the cladding and the finishes. And these are the things that are kind of loosely designed before we get there. And that's because, as I say, the designing in for flexibility, but it's important that I leave things undesigned so that both the local community and the international participants can work to overcome those design problems and work with the materials we know we have. So this one, for example, was the big pivot doors that we have on the front of the building, and working out a way to not only fabricate them but then install them because they weighed a ton, and then also get them to pivot as they were supposed to. And then finally the opening ceremony. So that is the kava drink I was talking about, presented in the traditional way. It was a really grand opening and everyone had a really good time. So here's a few sort of final photos. There's the counterweight doors that you can see. So we weighted them at the top so that when you push them about a metre off the ground, they start to swing open by themselves, but in a controlled manner. So we had to get the balance of the weight perfect. And that goes back to the whole performance element of the brief, and creating this kind of stage effect on the front of the building. So when people come to see their meke performances, this is the kind of stage, and they'll do the performance on there while everyone sits on the village green or inside the building, depending on what the weather's doing on the day. So there we can see the doors again, and you can kind of see some of the bolted connections and making sure that everything's really tightly tied down so that it doesn't get torn down at the cyclone. So this is from inside the building looking outwards. That's me stood in the middle there. So you can see sort of the scale of the building. And as I say, I think it was 2 months construction from nothing to a finished building. So I think this one probably pushed the boundaries of how much you can get done in that time. But we did finish it all, thank God. Here's the stage again.
So having completed a number of projects, we then sort of have to look at ways in which we can evaluate both the success of each project, but also the success of our organisation and how we're growing. So one of the ways in which we're doing that now is to try and identify 3 things in each project that we take on. So the first being having a social impact, the second having an economic independence or economic impact, and then the third having an environmental impact. So moving forward, sort of every project that we do, and then the post-evaluation as well, is kind of looking at those 3 points and seeing where each project sits on that spectrum. And then the other side of it is looking at how CAUKIN Studio is progressing and how many projects we're able to take on each year. So the more projects we're able to take on, the more communities that we're able to impact and connect with, and also the more participants were able to come away with us. So in the first year, there was the Playscape, which we spoke about earlier, and then the following year we did 2 more playgrounds in Indonesia, the Playvillion and Palladium, and then the following year, so we were still at university, so we partnered up with Cardiff University to create a pop-up space for the entrepreneurship team to promote student entrepreneurship and that side of things. And then it was that year that we also scaled up to the 2 buildings in Fiji, which sort of really pushed us in terms of complexity and size, and I guess how much we were taking on. So that was after our first year in Masters, so that was Nweni Kindergarten, Vivili Community Hall. And then we went back to finish our thesis, and we were actually able to tie in the work we were doing with CAUKIN with our university work. So we approached some of the heads of the school and we asked, is there a way in which we can merge the 2? And they said, if you can write a brief which incorporates one of your existing projects that you're going to be taking on, then that can be its own studio and we'll find you a tutor for that. So we have an ongoing project that's still ongoing now in India, and so we proposed that project and they passed it. And so this was actually something Josh built as a sort of primer project, looking at waste material and utilising construction waste in new buildings. So all of this was found in skips or in construction sites from over-ordering. We then went to Sierra Leone. We had our first project in Africa, which was another playground, this time pushing a bit more in terms of complexity and form, and getting sort of a lot of the kids' ideas involved. So with this project, we got a little workshop out there through the NGO and got some of their ideas. A lot of it obviously was very unrealistic, but we were able to implement some of those, which was great. And then there's the 2 projects that we did in Fiji just this summer gone. So the Savandrondro Community Hall and the Nandi Community Hall. So this year we tried to scale up even further. So this should be the first year where our team sort of splits up into different groups. And we're having to take on quite a few more leaders. So people that have come away with us before as participants are now coming away with us as leaders and gaining more responsibility. And it's part of a sort of a bigger plan where we can increase the number of projects we do and increase the network of like-minded people working in this sector. So hopefully in a number of years we can continue doing more and more projects and sort of training people up through this system, and again sort of working with the same charities and the same communities to build up longer lasting relationships. So this project is very nearly finished. We've got 1 more week. We're heading up tomorrow actually to do some final touches. This was our first sort of major project in the UK, looking at some of the environmental problems. So this is a pavilion that will house a live beehive and some information about the native dark honeybee, which is facing some of the issues through imported bees. So all of this was constructed from reclaimed scaffolding that was donated towards the project. And yeah, a little bit different from what we've been used to. We'll be heading back to Fiji for another 2 projects, the first of which is for a school. So this is to house 400 children during the assembly. So at the moment they all assemble twice a day in the field, and whether it be really, really hot and sunny or very, very rainy, they're just subjected to that weather. So kids are getting heat stroke and passing out, and it's affecting their learning. So we'll be going there this year to create sort of this quite interesting structure that will not only provide them shelter during the assembly, but also a place to play, have their lunch, have ceremonies, graduation, etc., and host a whole different sort of range of, I guess, activities that they wouldn't usually have. We've then got another project with Buddha Batiki, which is a coconut oil cooperative. This is looking at sort of the economic independence aspect of the projects we're looking to take on now. So we're partnering up with a social enterprise which is formed of 300 community members that live on Batiki Island, and they are producing coconut oil to then sell all around the world, but they're currently doing it in their own homes or in their community hall. So they're looking at getting a dedicated space which also satisfies higher hygiene standards than they would otherwise be able to meet, and therefore increase their sales and also increase where they're able to sell their product to, and therefore create a sustainable income for that community forever. So any more developments that need to take place, they've already got that income coming in. We've then got a project in Vanuatu, so this will be our first project in Vanuatu. They have a fairly interesting issue where any sort of books that are donated currently to libraries or schools don't have a very long life because of the high moisture and humidity content in the air. So within about a year, they start to degrade and become not very usable. So we're working with some environmental design specialists at Cardiff University to develop some passive strategies to reduce the humidity and moisture in those rooms where the books will be stored. And then hopefully, if the project is successful and we can evaluate it over the course of a year or a number of years, we can then use this sort of as a prototype or test bed to do more projects and more library projects. So the community we're working with, they lost their school in the cyclone in 2015. So they've managed to rebuild a couple of classrooms, but they're still in need of an additional classroom, the library space, and teacher's office. So that's what this building will be. And then we've got our second project in Africa. So we've got a project in Zambia, which is at Evergreen School. They've got quite the charity we're working with had quite an interesting problem where they built a project actually with Orchid Studio, which was the talk last month. And because it was such a great school, all of the kids in the area all then rushed to that school, increasing their attendance really, really high, and the class sizes went to over 100, and then class sizes in other schools dropped. But also, even with the class sizes dropped, the class size was still too high. But now that the charity is trying to sort of resolve this issue by evening out sort of class sizes and bringing other students, sort of, I guess, redistributing them a little bit better. So this school will have another 4 classrooms put towards it and a teacher's office as well, and should hopefully then reduce the overall class size to about 40 across both schools, which is great. And then that's also a new sort of material for us to explore as well. So we'll be working with brick, round earth, and again, with working in so many different contexts, it becomes increasingly important for us to make sure we find the right people to partner with and the right local project managers and local contractors who already have all this knowledge and this skill. And we're simply acting as a sort of facilitator. So that's sort of how we see us growing and how we're able to do so many projects in different places. So in terms of, again, scaling up, one of those things that comes under that umbrella is how many participants can come away with us and also where they're all from. So in the first year, we were able to take away sort of 15 to 20 people, and now over the number of years we've increased this, and we've managed to connect with universities all over the world and have people from tons of different nationalities, and it's really enabled the projects to have so many different points of view and so many different ways of looking at problems and coming up with solutions, which has really sort of added quite a bit of value in terms of on the projects. So luckily, now that we're doing more and more projects, especially doing projects in the same places or similar locations, it's enabling us to go back and visit and carry out post-evaluation on some of the projects we've completed. So this was the Nweni kindergarten, which we completed in 2017. So last year we were able to go back a year later. When we first arrived in 2017, the kids were getting taught in the school canteen, which was basically a very, very dimly lit, very small space. And there was only about eight kindergarten children being taught in that space. So they were looking for basically a dedicated classroom, a couple of toilets, and a basically much better environment that would increase their learning and increase attendance. And so when we went back, it was great to then hear that attendance had gone up from 8 students all the way up to 30 students. And it was kind of something we hadn't really anticipated or designed for. So they're now looking to do 2 classes, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and enabling them to take on more and more students, which is really great. And it's sort of highlighted the importance of unexpected outcomes and trying to factor those in and design in flexibility or design in ways in which a project could grow or the function could change in the future. Questions?
Shall I start?
Yes.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for coming in and giving us an insight into all the work that you've been doing. It's absolutely fantastic and inspirational and quite galvanising as well. And we are a practice of 450 people, AHMA, and we're architects, we're graphic designers, we're people who are brilliant at IT, at organising CAD, at finance, all those things. And we're sort of a multifaceted practice, and we're very, very lucky for that and to have that support for all the architects who work here. I'm really keen to understand how, as a practice, we can contribute to what you're doing. I know there are probably loads of architects from HMM who are thinking, well, we just want to go out there and help. And sometimes that's okay, and sometimes that's not okay, because we're all busy architects, we're employed on big projects. But I'm sure that the infrastructure that we provide as a big practice can in some way contribute to the work that you're doing. And so I'm just interested to understand how you think that might play into what you're contributing already.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something we're always looking at implementing as well, in ways in which we can collaborate with other industries, bigger practices, other sort of means. And I guess one way in which, like you touched upon, is having people come away with us. We've had participants that have been sponsored by their company or companies that they've worked with previously to go out and then for a period of time and then come back and share what they've learned, or that kind of cultural exchange. And then another way in which we're always looking for help is that connection into that bigger network of people that you have, where you've got so many people in so many different types of skills, and the infrastructure that you've built up in terms of your office. Obviously there's 3 of us working full time, and then an extended team of maybe 10 people that work project to project. But having access to an office space, printing, like small things that you don't really think add up, but they become quite unaffordable to a very small practice, especially one working in a charitable sector. So I think that's one way we're looking at gaining help or gaining support that isn't just simply financial. Don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I think in terms of the design of the projects as well, there's obviously a lot of specific contextual design issues that crop up. I mean, the Vanuatu project and the whole moisture and content in the air, we've had to reach out to the Welsh School of Architecture experts there, and there's very specific design problems that obviously we don't have the expertise to cover. So I think, collaborating with larger practices that maybe have environmental design experts or more specialist team members on those sorts of problems is super helpful to us.
Fantastic. Well, that's really good to really good to know. Has anybody else got any other questions? Yes. I'll bring this up to you.
Yeah, I was just wondering how you sustain your own careers. Do you, you're also working full-time now as students, and it's a bit easier to work freelance as students, but as your careers develop, you, or essentially do you get paid for doing this work, or how do you see your future progressing?
Yeah, thanks. I think the fact that we started this whilst we were at university, as you say, and could do this all for free for the first sort of 4 years of doing it has enabled us to set up enough of a foundation that now we need to go full time and need to sustain ourselves, that we can do. So our income stream is from two sources, I guess. So there's the participation fees that all the international participants pay, and then there's design fees that we charge the local the NGOs or charities. But we kind of it's really important to strike a balance between making sure that the participation fees aren't really high, so that no students or young professionals can afford them, but also that the design fees aren't really high for the NGOs, because then that takes way too much money out of the materials budget. So it's constantly trying to make sure we're striking the right balance between that, which we're always working on. But and that obviously is where our income comes from, and is how we can sustain ourselves. But again, a lot of it's still very kind of breadline stuff. So getting help from our pro bono engineers and reaching out to other people in other professions is really helpful to us as well.
Anybody else have questions? We'll leave that with you, actually. I'm going to take this one up here.
Sorry, that won't. Yeah, super impressive work. Really cool to see. I was just kind of wondering where you think this is going to go in terms of the architecture, in terms of like the projects seem to be getting more and more complex, really elegant formally, but not kind of increasing in scale and things like that, and how in a kind of 2-month period, which seems really sensible for a kind of participation period, can it increase, and how many people do you have on site to do something like that in 2 months?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've always consciously, year on year and building to building, tried to design something different. So hopefully none of the buildings, maybe it did to you guys, but none of them look the same. We're always trying to push the boundaries of what we can do in that time frame, and also what we can do with the local materials and the budget. And so yeah, it's really important to us that we're always progressing on the design front. I mean, in terms of people on site, we have usually 10 to 15 to maybe up to 20 international participants, and then at least an equal amount of local people on site. So it can be a pretty busy site at times, but I think that's what's needed, and it's kind of pairing up international participants with local people to make sure that there's that exchange of knowledge and kind of everyone's getting along and working together fine. I think actually this year is the first year that we'll be doing a build that is longer than 2 months. The participatory period is still 2 months, but the Evergreen School is quite a large build. I think it's about 400-ish meters squared, which realistically to build in 2 months isn't viable. So we're going to be sending out one of our team members alongside the NGO to work with a fully local contracting team and local project manager to build sort of the first couple of phases and get that off the ground, so that when then the international participants come, they can do the second half of it essentially. So I think that's a way we can start to build larger buildings over longer time frames, and still get the international participants to see a build from start to finish. So with that Evergreen School, there'll be 2 classrooms built and a teacher's office before participants get there, but when the participants get there, they'll build the remaining 2 classrooms and maybe some toilets. So they will still see a building from start to finish, which is really important to us. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that covers it.
Yeah.
I think it's really inspiring work. And what do you see as the kind of most challenging aspect of getting a project really to happen?
I think there's definitely a number of challenges. The big one is always funding, like fundraising for the actual build costs. So we'll have tons of charities approach us, and we'll have tons of conversations, and loads of projects will be in the sort of idea and brief making phase. And it doesn't. Everybody could be extremely passionate about it and enthusiastic, but until there's enough money fundraised to cover all of the costs associated with it, it comes to sort of bit of a standstill. And even still, we've got projects that we've taken on where there hasn't been funding in place yet, but it's sort of that sort of mutual agreement that at some point it will be, and I guess it's putting that pressure on and having a deadline of when it's going to start building. That, you know, there is always a way, basically, and the NGOs always find a way to fundraise, and even when hiccups do come across. So we've had one of our projects this year is funded through the Fijian government, and they cut their funding for the projects in half, which then, you know, has a massive impact. But it just means that we have to be flexible to take that on and adapt the design suitably, and then they obviously take on a little bit of different kind of work in terms of additional fundraising. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. And then on site, there's always delays, and material delays is probably one of the biggest ones. Often having sort of remote locations, there can be also a scarcity of material. So there can be a lot of development going on in these places. So in Fiji, often there'd be a shortage of, you know, we had one time the concrete facility had shut down, and that was the only one within the facility. So no concrete was being manufactured, and then that would put a hold on our foundations. And again, we've had similar with timber. So it's striking that balance, making sure that we can do enough in advance, but also leave enough open to flexibility. So if we order everything super far in advance, it then doesn't leave any flexibility or adaptation for when we arrive. So it's striking that balance again.
Yeah, I think that to get a project off the ground and to fruition, it also usually depends on sort of one character or a couple of people, whether they be within the NGO or within the local community, to really push forward and be really helpful. And I think, as Harry said, we talk to loads of charities and NGOs and even communities, and we can usually sort of tell within the first few emails or Skype calls which ones are going to be the projects we end up building. And that's kind of just down to the character or the person that is really passionate about the project and wants to push it forward.
I think the visuals look really nice. I just want to know which software you use to make them.
Pretty much all our visuals are done on SketchUp and Photoshop, more or less. It's all pretty basic stuff, or hand-drawn. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
How are you managing your sustainability? For example, the use of timber, is it renewable? Is that something you have implemented, or is it the contractor?
I mean, a lot of the materials ordering comes down to, I mean, we specify what's needed and how much of it's needed, and a lot of that comes down to the NGO, but it's always sourced as locally to site as possible, even if that means we have to pay a little bit more for it than if we paid someone from another island to ship it over, because we're then supporting the local community. But in terms of sustainability with the actual material, that's kind of down to the NGO. They know it far better than we do, especially in the places we've never built before, like Zambia and Vanuatu. So we kind of have to lean on them for that. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I was just curious about your name, because I was reading the formation of your names, the origins of UK, Canada, and I was wondering if you could talk about that. And also another question was about insurance. I was just curious, you know, do you have your own PI, or do you rely on other practices to supply that, or do you make anything?
Yeah, so the name CAUKIN comes from where the founders are from, so Canada, UK, and Indonesia. The majority of us now are still based in the UK. However, the one from Canada is based now in America, and Indonesia in Jakarta. So we're still working with both of them quite closely, and hopefully next year we'll be having a project in Indonesia, which will be pretty much entirely run by the Indonesian branch and her people that she's working with over there. So and again, with our partner in New York, we're looking at sort of basically building upon his network there and setting up the organisation in America, and again sort of growing in that way. But yeah,
the insurance is a tough one. I mean, yes, we are insured, by the way, but as soon as you go to any insurance company and say you're not that qualified, you're only part 2, you're building overseas, then that's just a big no-no for them. So it's taken us a long time, and I suppose a portfolio to be able to show them, look, this is what we're doing, this is how we do it, to be able to get insurance, and it costs a lot of money. But we have to make sure that we're covered from every angle. So yes, we do. We have our own PI and PL and all those things, and every participant that comes away with us also has their own sort of group travel insurance policy, which covers them for medical and all those evacuation from very remote locations and things. But yeah, we spent a lot of hours on the phone to insurance companies and a lot of money trying to get the right insurance. I think we've probably cracked it now, but it's taken a long time and a lot of persuasion.
Most of your projects are abroad. Do you see any opportunities in collaborating with local communities within, let's say, the UK or London?
Yeah, definitely. The Eden project build that we will be going back to next week is probably our first major project in the UK, and we want to push more of those for sure. I think maybe one of the reasons that we haven't done so many projects in the UK, or we didn't start doing projects in the UK, was because I suppose we kind of needed that portfolio of buildings to be able to then go to stakeholders in communities or financiers for projects here to say, like, look, we can do it and we have done it. Whereas I feel like we probably wouldn't have had such a warm response to people who want to do projects in the UK if we just had no portfolio or no real experience. So I think that was a difficult one to overcome, but now we've started to get projects in the UK like the Eden project. Hopefully that will lead to more, and as you say, definitely we want to continue and work with more local communities for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's one way in which we see ourselves growing as well. So with all of our projects taking a lot of students with us, it narrows down sometimes when we can do those projects. So having more local projects will enable us to sort of partner with universities during term time, but also enable us just to work on projects, throughout the year. And so even looking at projects that we can self-initiate. So hopefully in the near future, there's a project we want to sort of self-initiate about mental health and loneliness and well-being. And I guess that would be the ultimate goal, is to then sort of, if we come up with an idea for a project, then contact those key stakeholders, contact local NGOs that are working within these realms, and like put the idea of this project towards them, because obviously we have a greater knowledge of this context, having lived and grown up in the UK. It sort of enables us to maybe have a different kind of impact.
I think part of that as well is our sort of long-term aspirations for what we're doing is to kind of develop a course or an offering within universities in the UK to architectural students that is sort of accredited or can be like an add-on module. So more projects in the UK would help us to do that, but it's something that we're hoping to kind of develop and progress into as we progress with the company.
Hi, you touched on something very interesting about designing buildings that can be replicated. Do you do anything to follow up on that? Is it just to promote it once your buildings are done so that they can be replicated on the same country, on the same area?
Yeah, I suppose we're still kind of very early stages of that, because we've only been doing it for 5 years, so it's making sure that we have enough time to evaluate and to see whether design ideas that we've implemented on our buildings have then been replicated by local people as they've continued building. And that comes back to designing buildings that might look complicated visually or interesting visually, but when fundamentally are simple to build, and hopefully through working with the international participants and the local people and that trade-off of design knowledge and for construction knowledge, everyone kind of benefits, and the local people will then use what they've learned through design to implement on their new houses or whatever they build next. And then equally the international participants take away from the construction side.
Joey as well.
Yeah, and actually so in Fiji, Vivili Community Hall, which was in 2017, we had a community member called Joey who was, he had some skills. Everyone knows how to swing a hammer in Fiji. But he worked with us for the duration of the project and kind of learned a lot more about construction while he was working with us and alongside the local guys and girls in Vivili. and he then went on to set up his own carpentry company, and we spoke to him last time we were back in Fiji in September, and he's built loads of houses all over Fiji now. So I haven't seen any of those houses. Whether they look the same as what we've designed, I don't know. But I think time will tell, and as we can keep going back to locations, we'll be able to evaluate whether what we've kind of implemented has been taken on or learnt from.
I was just wondering how much context you have with the local communities in the design process, and how you kind of make sure that you're not just Westerners kind of imposing something onto a community that you don't have any connection to prior to.
Sure. I think a big part of that is through collaborating with the right NGOs, because the biggest way to overcome that sort of Westerner coming over and implementing something is through trust, and the NGOs we work with obviously have way more trust with those communities than we do. So making sure we identify the right NGOs to work with is really important. But then involving them, the local community, through all of the brief making process and all of the design process, and kind of making sure that every sketch iteration or even every email we send is copied, they're copied into or is fed back to them. So we usually do it, I mean, it becomes impractical to do it that often, but at every stage at least we'll send out packages or sketches or ideas, and constantly having Skype feedback and kind of that back and forth process is as much as we can do while we're here and they're in Fiji. I think, again, as we progress and can go back to projects or spend more time in communities, especially in Fiji, all the buildings we've done in Fiji are all within close proximity to each other. It gives us more of a chance to kind of meet the community on the ground before we go building there, and can do some of that kind of trust building ourselves.
Yeah, I think that will always be a limiting factor within international projects, is just how much engagement we can have. So obviously the ideal situation would be for us to go out in advance for a month and do these kind of design workshops on the ground with them, and then build it a few months later. That just comes down financially if it's not in the budget of the NGO, which it pretty much never is, because obviously the primary focus is to cover the material costs. It just means we have to use technology. I guess we're lucky in that sense, where technology is enabling us to have that kind of communication as much as possible. So having Skype calls, and we do have to put a lot of trust in the NGO as well. So we do, if we pass on a task for the NGO to take on with the community, then we're putting that trust into them that they are carrying it out effectively, asking the right questions, and then feedbacking to us in the right manner as well. Obviously, if we could be there in person as well, that just cuts out the middleman almost. But again, it can help actually going through the NGO, because they've built up that trust. So if we just turned up, we run the risk of not actually getting sort of truthful feedback, because people are so grateful to have anything, they'll just agree and say yes. Whereas when the NGO has built up that trust over a number of years, the community is then more likely to give their full opinion or honest opinion about what they actually need, or if there is anything that needs to be changed. So I think it's always something we're working to develop and look into new ways of approaching it.
I was wondering how you decide which sort of international students and things to bring along with you, and if you have any sort of requirements from them in terms of experience, or what they have to pay, just so that you don't fall into the pitfalls of it becoming sort of a form of volunteerism, where people just go for a nice holiday and you do a lot of construction and take nice photos with local communities and things like that.
Yeah, so we have an application process which basically vets people to know that they're coming away and for the right reasons. So we don't look for any sort of past construction experience or that side of things. Like we want a big mixture of people. So we have people right from first years all the way through to qualified architects coming away with us. But what we really look for is kind of their enthusiasm and why they want to come away with us, and what their aspirations are in terms of their own careers. And I think through that process, we have been lucky enough to sort of attract like-minded people that don't see it as a holiday, because it's definitely not a holiday. and it is a lot of work, but it's the people that are coming away with us are enjoying this kind of work, and are there to learn and build up their career and put forward any of their own sort of skills that they've built up.
Yeah, I think also that by the time people have submitted an application, thought about their answers, gone through, paid the fee, committed to trusting us as an organisation, they're usually the right kind of people, and we haven't yet had anyone that we've thought you shouldn't be here, which is great. And yeah, there's a participation fee, and we encourage everyone to fundraise towards that. And we've had people in the past who've fundraised more than twice the amount required, and actually, in the case of Ngo Kindergarten, that meant that we were able to put an extra 2 toilets in, which we wouldn't have been able to afford to do before. And we've had people fundraise in really inventive ways as well. We had a girl who went around all of the coffee shops in Sheffield and took their waste coffee grind, turned it into a facial scrub, sold that, and then fundraised towards the participation fee. So yeah, I think by the time people have gone through the whole process and are ready to commit to flying out, spending 2 months, in remote location, they're already the right people for the project.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think we're all probably desperate to go and try out some building somewhere in the world, whether it's an Eden project or where was it?
Zambia.
Zambia, that was it. All the South Pacific.
Yeah, all South Pacific.
So yes, thank you very much. Thank you as well to Article 25 for organising the talks here. We're really grateful for you to come along and be here to listen to them. So,